I'm now joined by the Banking Association of South Africa's MD, Coovadia, on the issue of banks and land reform. Cas, thanks so much for joining us at our home today.
Thank you for having me.
So the banks have added their voice to this very important debate here in South Africa about land. You don't want Section 5 of the Constitution to be changed, even though the President says that it will not be done in a manner that will destabilize the economy. So why are you against the amending of the Constitution?
Well, we believe Section 25 allows for expropriation without compensation. I mean, the President or the ANC through Enoch Godongwana, I think, clarified after the President's statement, and President spoke as the President of the ANC.
Sure.
Enoch clarified that they want to just bring about more clarity in the Constitution, okay? That's fine if that's their view. Well, the position we're taking is that ideally we don't think it needs to be changed, but if it is changed, it must not undermine property rights, and it must not undermine what the President himself has said, that we need to effect land reform in a way that actually does not undermine food security, commercial agriculture, and our ability to actually, and the imperative to draw investment which leads to growth, which leads to jobs, which leads to addressing poverty and inequality.
Sure.
So that's the view we're taking. We've been absolutely clear we believe land reform is absolutely necessary given our history, but we believe that we can do this in a way in close collaboration between government, the banking sector, agriculture and others, and we can achieve a pragmatic outcome, and I think we will achieve a pragmatic outcome.
You know, what I found interesting about the report that BASA issued today is if you look at private demand for credit, that's waning. We had numbers that came out today. You look at the level of private investment in South Africa, that's falling because of policy uncertainty. Yet banks have been confident enough to continue extending loans out to farmers now to the tune of 148 billion rand. So you say that this is the banking sector being committed to land reform. Some might say that this is not prudent risk management.
Well, this is if you compare the December 2017 figures to June 2018 figures, okay? So this was up to June 2018. In the last couple of months, I think this debate has taken a turn that's very rhetorical, very populist in some areas. So I think if we have to pull out figures, latest figures, and going forward, I think you'll see the impact of that.
Okay.
Okay. As at June, I don't think the debate was as strong as it is now, and certainly not some of the less pragmatic stuff. So I think that it would start having an impact now, and that would be unfortunate.
Okay, so you are here to talk about solutions, and the industry has come up with a list of solutions it thinks could help land reform that it agrees is necessary in South Africa, starting off with a land summit. So I'm interested in this because the ANC held a land summit earlier this year. Where were the banks?
Well, the ANC had a land summit which was primarily an ANC affair as such.
But there were a host of private individuals there. We had lawyers there, we had business people there.
Well,
I didn't see banks.
BASA certainly didn't receive an invitation. Okay. And when we're talking about a land summit, we're saying that, and we're not talking about hundreds of people. We're saying let's identify the 5 or 6 critical players. Let's put them into a room and let's thresh out what we need to do, including discussions on where the trade-offs need to be made, where the compromises need to be made, and what the options are.
Okay. I mean, talking about those trade-offs, so state land, we do know that the government has a lot of state land. The President has committed to releasing some of the state land immediately for urban and rural development. In fact, as I understand, Gauteng Premier is addressing the media tomorrow on its plans to move on state land. Yet it seems as though, I mean, when it comes to the private sector land, we're not getting any commitments coming from the private sector to the table. What's the issue there?
Well, again, one of the other things we said we need to do is let's agree across stakeholders on how best we actually get the figures right, okay? We've also, and we haven't entered this debate just now. I mean, almost 3 years ago, we interacted with the then Minister in Quinty, and we suggested mechanisms for private sector financing of new land that could be shared between existing commercial farmers and new farmers, with some sort of a scheme where the existing commercial farmers provide backup and training and so on and so on. So we had said, in response to what was termed the 50-50 scheme at that time, where the intention was to expropriate 50% of commercial agricultural land, and enable the workers on that land to get ownership of that. What we suggested is that instead of doing that, why don't we find arable land close to that farm? Why don't we offer the existing commercial farmer that he or she can buy 49% of that, and they must raise the funding for that. Government comes to the party and we come to the party as well. Individual banks could do the funding and on a totally transparent basis to fund 51% for the workers. And the deal with the farmer is that he or she provides backup and training and so on. In that way, the existing commercial farmer gets 49% of a new farm. The workers get the majority stake. We're all involved in this. It's a win-win situation. And over a period of time, workers can buy the farm out. And I think it's those sorts of discussions we need to have. And we've been interacting with agribusiness and others. And there are probably about 25 to 30 commercial farmers at the moment who will be prepared to come into this sort of a scheme. Okay? And I think if we have those sorts of discussions, if we try to find win-win solutions, because if we want to ensure that commercial agriculture is not negatively impacted, if we want to ensure that food security is not negatively impacted, we're going to have to find win-win solutions. And so that's what we're talking about.
I mean, Cass, you're talking about banks having invested, it's 1.6 trillion rand of the savings and salaries and investments of ordinary South Africans in property loans. And should land reform, because we're talking about more than just farms here, be done in a way in which it depreciates the current property values, that the banking industry will not be able to absorb the economic shocks of that. It sounds like you're warning us of the next crisis here.
Yeah, well, look, I don't think we'll get to that.
Okay.
I mean, we're just saying that that's the exposure out there. And I think that people need to appreciate that that's the exposure out there. That if in the unlikely event, and I want to be absolutely clear, we don't agree with these doomsday scenarios being painted by certain organizations and certain presidents somewhere else. We believe that we will be able to engage. We believe we will be able to arrive at a pragmatic solution. But I think it is necessary for everybody to understand what the stakes are if this thing goes wrong.
Okay. Got it. Passing question. You're talking about, or you've also made comments about a state-owned bank and the terms and conditions under which that should operate. I mean, just spell that to us.
Well, the first thing we need to ask is, if government wants to establish a state-owned bank, why do we want to do that? Because we need to understand, so there are some proponents of state-owned banks who say that state-owned banks must lend to people and areas where commercial banks are not lending to, okay? I think we need to understand, why are commercial banks not lending to certain people or certain types of activity? Because banks are in the business of lending, right?
Sure.
So if there are underlying structural issues that's making it difficult for commercial banks to actually develop a normal market in certain areas, what makes a state bank different? Because at the end of the day, a bank is about, and particularly if a state bank is going to use public tax money or deposits, at the end of the day, a bank has to lend money responsibly so that it gets that money back. If it doesn't get that money back, then it's got to be bailed out by taxpayers' money, which we can't afford that. Right?
Sure.
So we'd like to understand why the need for a state bank. Are there ways of government and development finance institutions and commercial sector and development finance institutions and others working together to see why markets aren't working in certain sectors and how we can work together to make those markets work? I think the less we have to use taxpayers' money And taxpayer money is pretty scarce at the moment. We know that, given the commission that's on at the moment.
Sure.
The less we have to use that and rather channel as much of that into social development and service delivery and unlock private sector funding, the better for this country. And so it's a government's decision if they want to have a state bank. But I think that we need to ensure that its objectives are clear. We need to ensure that it acts in a manner that does not bring risk into the system and does not continuously need taxpayer bailout.
Sure. Cass, 9 months ago, it was very hard to see a smile on the face of a business person because of the situation then. How are you feeling about South Africa now?
Look, we're obviously in a better place. I mean, business, the banking sector, and broader business worked very hard and took a stand against what was happening in the last few years. We're obviously in a better space. But, in the last few years, a lot was destroyed. We now need to rebuild, and it's tough. So I don't think we should become complacent. I think that business still needs to be coming to the party to work with government to make things work. And I think government now needs to take some of the hard decisions necessary to get investment in and growth going.
I'm out of time to ask you what some of those hard decisions are. It's an interview for another time. Cass, thanks so much for your time. Of course, that was the MD of the Banking Association of South Africa, Cass Coovadia.